Today, we are talking about a topic that is close to many of your hearts: student debt. And we're going to get the data and the lowdown from our friends at USAFacts. Today, I'm talking to Sasha Anderson, who is Data Partnerships Manager at USAFacts. As I hope you know by now, USAFacts is a nonpartisan civic organization dedicated to making government data accessible and understandable to folks like you and me, and they are a News Not Noise content partner. Sasha, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jessica.
Okay, first, let's establish the scope of this topic. How many Americans owe student debt, and how much do they owe?
So 43 million Americans have federal student loan debt outstanding right now, and that's a total of $1.6 trillion. You can also think about that as 1 in 5 Americans of working age, and the average balance is $37,105.
Wow, that's astonishing. Every time I hear those numbers, I'm surprised by them anew. So to give us some reference point, would you remind us what is the average cost of college right now?
So the average cost at a four-year institution, and that's for tuition, room, board, fees, right now is $28,775. For a two-year institution, that's just a little more than $11,000.
More than 40 million Americans are dealing with this. Can you give us a sense of what's the profile of the person who's most likely to still owe?
So as you might imagine, borrowers tend to be on the younger side. So you have about 50% of those that still have an outstanding balance are under the age of 34. And then I also like to look at it by cutting it up into the average amount outstanding, the different buckets. So you have 56% of people owe less than 20,000 and 11% owe more than 80,000. So the majority are on the lower end in terms of outstanding balance. Again, that's not the total amount that they've paid.
So it's a lot of people owing less.
Mhm.
Can we break this down a little bit further by type of education? What's the breakdown of debt for people who pursued undergraduate degrees versus graduate degrees?
So this is interesting, and I think less often talked about, but we do see that those pursuing graduate education do tend to take out loans more frequently. So for undergraduate, it's about 43% of first-time students are offered loans. And for graduate students, it varies by the type of graduate program, but for those doing certificate programs, it's 55%. For masters, it jumps up to 60%. And then for PhD programs, it's anywhere from 48 to 75%, depending on the type of PhD.
Wow.
And their average balances are higher as well. So average graduate balances are $72,300.
It's a lot of money. You've made it clear that this is debt that disproportionately impacts younger folks in America. And this is where I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute. Student loans are unique. Some have variable interest rates. Private student loan rates are not regulated by Congress. And unlike other loans, student loans aren't generally forgiven even during bankruptcy. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the repayment reality for folks. Do you have a sense what's the average loan amount?
So the average loan amount awarded, so again, this is for a first-time undergraduate going to a four-year institution. We're looking at that average loan amount being $12,030. I want to pause here because your audience might notice that we just talked about an average balance of 37,000. That's 37,000 is the average outstanding, so the amount left to be paid. The average loan is smaller at $12,000, about $12,000, which means probably many people were able to pay off their loans fairly quickly. And it's those that had larger loan balances that they're still paying off that make up that outstanding balance.
That's really helpful clarification.
Yeah. So generally for government loans, the standard repayment terms are 120 months, so 10 years. And that can be extended up to 25 years if you have a balance that's greater than 30,000. So it's part of what we're seeing. And then on the private market, it varies based on the lender.
Wow. How long does it take to pay off the average loan?
Well, so we talked about how 50% of borrowers are under the age of 34, but that means the other 50% are over the age of 34. That means that they're more than 10 years out from when most people graduate from college, and they are still paying off that loan. So more than the 10 years. We don't know exactly the overall length of the loan, but we do know that for many people, it's taking more than the 10-year time period.
And what do defaults look like?
It's very interesting right now with the pandemic.
Yeah.
So there's forbearance where people have stopped payment. And right now that has jumped up to 23.2 million people. That's as of this year, 2021, going into the pandemic. So early 2020, that was actually sitting at 2.7 million. Makes sense. Most of those are probably approved under the CARES Act legislation that paused student loan repayment, right?
Wait, but it went from 2 million-ish people to how many?
23.2 million.
Wow.
So a lot of people affected. And we don't know the reasons why people have taken advantage of the ability to pause loans. So it would be helpful to have more data there. We can also look at default rates. And those were, so right now they're 5.3 million. Going into the pandemic, it was 5.7. So those have gone down just a little bit.
Maybe because they can pause it.
Potentially.
Let's talk a little bit about millennials for a minute, because they get a lot of flack for being in debt and not, for example, owning a home as young as their parents did. But let's just create some context for this. What's the cost of a student loan right now compared to the cost of housing?
That's a good comparison to make. So we can look at the cost of a house. So going back to 2001, adjusting for inflation, the average cost of a home in the US was $176,000. Now we're looking at $226,000. So that's great news if you bought a house 20 years ago. Not so much if you're looking to buy today. So then we have to look at, well, what does a down payment on that average home value look like? And that would be, if you're looking at just the minimum of 5% down, that's $11,300. Up to, recommended is 20% down, and that's $45,000. So you're sitting within that range of the 37,000 average outstanding balance for many people. I do want to caveat that, though, with increasing housing costs is not necessarily a bad thing. If people are making more money, it makes sense that we'd be spending more on housing, right? And also more on education. So we also should look at income. So looking at median wage over that same time period back to 2001, median wage adjusted for inflation was 38,000. And then as of 2019, the most recent year of data, we're at 39,000. So it hasn't increased a lot. And I think that's where this conversation is coming from.
People need to make more to afford all this. So college graduates are in a different situation than many of their parents or grandparents are for a lot of reasons. You pointed out some. I also think of the GI Bill and a lot of the government supports that existed to help people get through college back in the day. But let's talk about how the cost of college and loans and debt have changed over time.
Going back over 40 years, we have seen an increase in the cost of college. It has increased 174% in that time period since 1980. So part of it is the cost of college. But I do want to say that when it comes to student loans, part of this trend too is just that more people are going to college. So it makes sense that then we'd have more people with outstanding balances. So looking over that same 40-year time period, the population grew 43%, but the number of bachelor degrees grew 110%. And then graduate degrees even more, they grew 171%. So college costs more, but also just more people are going and taking out financing to do so.
Also, you said college increased more than 100% in cost. Salaries haven't gone up commensurate, have they?
Correct. Yes, but again, you do make more with a college degree. There's definitely a difference between average salary for someone with a bachelor's versus those with a high school education. So certainly still has value, but there is that cost increase.
And what's changed during the pandemic?
During the pandemic, we can look at a couple of trends. So the last time you and I spoke, we talked about the Great Resignation, the quit rate. So people are leaving their jobs. When we dug into that data at USAFacts by age, we see that for those who are 18 to 29, 53% of them said that they had quit jobs to go to school. So we know that that is definitely happening. But at the same time, so the Census Bureau, they started doing a new survey product called the Household Pulse Survey to look into what did the lives of Americans look like right now. And in that survey, we see that 7 million households with someone who was intending to go to college has decided not to go. So we won't have really good insight into how the pandemic has affected college attendance until we get enrollment rates for 2021 and 2022. But I think we have these two opposing forces. Some people are going to be taking the opportunity to go back to school, and for others, the pandemic has really limited their ability to do so.
Interesting. We do know that during the pandemic, there was, as you mentioned earlier, a pause on student debt repayment. How many people did that affect, and what's the status of that program?
So that affected about 40 million federal loan borrowers. Again, it's just for certain federal loan products and not for private loans. So it's not everyone, but still a significant portion of those with outstanding balances. The program was developed, it was passed through the CARES Act. It has been extended both by President Trump and President Biden, and currently is expected to end in January.
So they have a few more months of that. There was a program that President Biden passed. He recently canceled $9.5 billion in student debt. It was basically a forgiveness. I've heard from so many people outrage, confusion, because it didn't impact them. And they're wondering who did get helped by this and how big of a dent is it making?
Yeah, I can see where those questions are coming from. So it affected very specific types of borrowers. So you have those with permanent disabilities, those who have been defrauded by failed for-profit schools, and current and former active duty military. So if you're outside of those categories, then it makes sense that you wouldn't have been affected by this. So the Biden administration did cancel 563,000 loans. That accounts for 1.3% of borrowers and less than 1% of the outstanding loan balance.
So it's not nothing, but there's no surprise that most people are not feeling it. Wow. It's such an important topic, Sasha, and one where I feel like we gloss over it too often without really putting the numbers and the substance to it. So I'm really grateful for your information and for clarifying all the details for us today.
Yeah, we're happy to dig in. It's really interesting stuff.
It is. And I will tell everybody we're going to post a link to a story in stories so that you can find out more about this. And always you can go to USAFacts.org to get more of the info. Thank you.
Thanks.